Up until now, it was considered relatively difficult to figure out what kind of ecological and environmental changes we've brought about because of our habits of agricultural expansion. But recently, there's been an interesting case study in Japan that reveals the exact nature of these changes and how they're affecting our wildlife populations. We'll break down the key elements of this study in this video. First up, the history of Ishikari lowlands. These lowlands are located in northwest Japan, and until the 19th century, they were occupied by local hunter-gatherer communities. Before the plains were cleared, the area was filled with dense forests, covering around 60 to 75% of the Ishikari Plain. That's a lot of vegetation, people. Before its clearance for farming purposes, the lowlands consisted of almost 32% wetlands. The conversion to farmland began around 166 years ago, and significant changes in land cover have been documented since then. The forests were chopped down to make way for agricultural expansion. In their place, we now see croplands, land paddies, and urban areas. The urban areas keep expanding to introduce newer housing facilities. Thankfully, a record was kept of these changes. Usually, it's incredibly hard to find evidence of such changes, but Japan kept fine-scale maps of its various territories since the 1850s. This made the research about the topological changes in the landscape of Ishikari lowlands easier. And now we delve into what's the importance of these changes on local ecology and what it means for biodiversity. Next, we have the observed changes in the population of birds. We know that different species thrive better in wetlands, forests, and grasslands compared to rice paddies and croplands. The former areas offer more diversity in habitat, and as a result, there's a distinct abundance of biological communities. Due to the broad-scale transformation of the lowlands into farmland for industrial agriculture, the wildlife community found in these lowlands began to gradually disappear. Their populations decreased until it became quite significant to warrant a case study. It really makes one think about how much wildlife was lost due to systematic deforestation of the area and the development of housing schemes and agricultural plots. Ever since the land was converted, a lot of bird populations decreased. If you were to visit the lowlands back before the transformation began, you would find oriental turtle doves, Japanese tits, and great spotted woodpeckers. All of these are considered forest-dwelling creatures, but now there aren't many left in the lowlands. In the wetlands, you were bound to come across reed buntings, swinhose rails, and lanceolated warblers, but alas, no more. The region's now populated with birds like the carrion crow and Eurasian skylarks, species often found in croplands and rice paddies. However, despite this shift in bird populations, the overall numbers are still low compared to pre-agriculture populations. And now for Munehiro Kitazawa's research on lowland bird communities. The shocking disappearance of birds often found in forests and wetlands was reported by Kitazawa and his co-researchers in his newly published report. Before this, Kitazawa had researched how certain native Japanese birds search for homes in different abandoned lands, and how drastic changes in land cover could affect this. Kitazawa described that there were multiple records and documents about the various changes in the Ishikari lowlands. He talked about consulting a vast treasure of literary records written by the explorers who had come to the region. These records described how the area primarily consisted of dense forests full of alders and Japanese elms. There were multiple descriptions of large wetlands full of common reed and sedges. Now, what did Kitazawa do with all this information? He went to his colleagues, and together they devised a strategy to study the changes in land cover in the Ishikari lowlands. They divided the region into 2-hectare plots and then proceeded to study each one and recorded the changes in the landscape by year. After this, they used a bird population model to calculate the abundance of different bird species in each area over the years. Because of this meticulous research, they were able to calculate the shifting changes in bird populations due to the clearance of the land. Next, the significance of this study. This study bears immense relevance in the scientific community. Globally, no such study has ever been conducted before because of a lack of data documenting the changes in wildlife populations over the years. Kitazawa was lucky that he found stores of information to compare these ecological changes and what these changes mean for the wildlife population of Japan. Chase Mendenhall from the Carnegie Museum of Natural History in Pittsburgh described how studies like this reveal the way biodiversity responds and reacts to change. It can help us in our conservation strategies so we can protect our wildlife populations. The thing that's really hard-hitting is the great magnitude of nature that we have lost owing to our agricultural practices. A lot of hunter-gatherer communities began disappearing a long time ago, and as time went on, we replaced our wetlands with farmlands. What we're witnessing is a loss of our biodiversity, and it bears great environmental consequences when local species begin to dwindle in population like this. Lastly, the perils of industrial agriculture. Laura Kehoe from the University of Oxford described how though, industrial agriculture does not benefit the natural world, and from Kitazawa's recent research, it can be seen how her statement holds true. The conversion of wildlands occupied by indigenous wildlife populations has had devastating consequences for biodiversity. It disturbs the local ecosystem and causes a shift in populations, and because of the rate at which wildlands are being transformed into areas for farming, these species will no longer have any habitats to occupy. It's a sad state of affairs indeed. The diminishing biodiversity leads to a lack of species richness, as well as a decrease in the abundance of different biological communities. The loss of such variety is quite saddening. Assessment of such losses can, however, be utilized to plan conservation actions to protect what wildlife we've got now. Farmlands now dominate. Wildlife populations suffer as a result. The degradation of their natural habitats is quite worrying, and we need to be more aware of the consequences of our actions. If we wish to protect our biodiversity, it's of the utmost importance that we protect our forests and our wetlands, the home of Earth's major wildlife populations. Now that we've got that covered, let's dive into some other news of interest regarding the environment and ecology, starting with hungry polar bears of the north. Climate change has certainly made life harder for everyone, and these beautiful white bears haven't had it easy either. A photograph of the bears devouring the carcass of a sperm whale has taken the internet by storm. The picture was recently shown in a Disney nature documentary, Polar Bear, that brings to attention how the life of these polar bears is in jeopardy. Sea ice has been declining for quite some time now, and this has caused the polar bears to migrate to land. This moving away from their natural habitat has caused polar bears to search for other sources of food. Polar bears hunt seals, which are considered a staple in their diet. Jeff Wilson, director of the aforementioned documentary, discussed how the carcass probably emerged from under the ice once winter ended. The wildlife filmmaker also remarked upon how the bears ate together in harmony and what a joy it was to experience their playful interactions with each other. Next is the emerging threat to islands in the Pacific. Waste disposal and nuclear pollution are the two things threatening the ecology of Pacific Island countries. For decades, these countries have been subject to nuclear testing while simultaneously being treated as dumping grounds for various waste materials. Between 1946 and 1958, the U.S. conducted a total of 67 nuclear tests in the Marshall Islands. This has had devastating consequences for both the ecology and the residents of the islands. There's been a rise in cancer rates in people living on the islands. And that's not it. A large number of cases of birth defects have been reported in newborns on the islands. That shows you how alarming the situation has got. When samples of soil from the Bikini Atoll's islands were tested for concentrations of radioactive plutonium, the results were very shocking. The samples contained 1,000 times more plutonium compared to Chernobyl. All of this is degrading the ecosystems of those islands, and developing countries need to stop treating them as their dumpsters. And finally, BirdLife Switzerland's centenary celebrations. BirdLife Switzerland was founded in 1922 with the goal of offering protection to birdlife in the country, as well as preventing their extinction and creating new habitats for the species. The best part is that the organization isn't just focused on the birds. Their efforts are directed towards protecting local biodiversity from the harms of climate change and its consequences. There are around 115 independent organizations working under BirdLife. All of them work together closely to accomplish their goals because when people work together, it yields better results, always. Ever since its creation in 1922, the organization has seen great growth. There are more than 67,000 members and around 60 or more youth groups. BirdLife was responsible for preventing the extinction of the little owl, and even now it continues to prioritize the protection of endangered bird species. That's a wrap for this video. Interested in more news about ecological changes due to agricultural expansion? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. See you in the next one.